The courtroom was dead silent, save for the cruel, echoing laughter of the woman in the red dress. She wasn't the wife. She was the mistress, and she was laughing at a woman who was 8 months pregnant, trembling, and about to lose everything. They thought they had pulled off the perfect heist, stealing a marriage, a fortune, and a future. But arrogance has a funny way of blinding you to the details. They didn't notice the judge's eyes narrow. They didn't expect the one specific question that would turn their victory into a prison sentence. This is the story of how a mistress mocked a wife in court and regretted it for the rest of her life. The elevator doors to the King County Superior Court slid open with a heavy metallic rattle, revealing the stark difference between the two women standing in the hallway. On the left stood Sarah Miller. She was 32 years old, though today she looked 50. Her face was pale, devoid of makeup, and her blonde hair was pulled back into a messy, utilitarian bun. But the most prominent thing about Sarah was her stomach. She was 34 weeks pregnant, carrying a child that felt heavier with every passing second. Her feet were swollen, stuffed uncomfortably into flat orthopedic shoes, and she wore a loose, grey maternity dress that had seen better days. She leaned against the cold marble wall, one hand resting protectively on her belly, trying to catch her breath. On the right, standing less than 10 feet away, was Chloe Vane. Chloe was a vision of everything Sarah currently wasn't. She was 24, sharp-featured, and dressed as if she were attending a gala rather than a divorce hearing. She wore a tight, crimson bodycon dress that probably cost more than Sarah's car, a vintage Chanel piece that hugged every curve. Her heels were 6-inch Louboutins, the red soles flashing aggressively against the dull courthouse floor. Her hair was a cascading waterfall of expensive brunette extensions, and her lips were painted a shade of red that matched her dress perfectly. Standing between them, looking at his phone and ignoring his pregnant wife entirely, was Mark Miller. Mark was the CIO of Miller & Associates, a high-end architectural firm in downtown Seattle. He was handsome in that sharp, predatory way, wearing a bespoke navy suit, a Rolex Submariner on his wrist, and an air of absolute boredom. "Can you believe she actually showed up wearing that?" Chloe whispered loudly, leaning into Mark's shoulder. She didn't bother to lower her voice. She wanted Sarah to hear. "It's a courtroom, Mark, not a homeless shelter. No wonder you looked elsewhere." Mark didn't reprimand her. He just chuckled, a low, cruel sound that hit Sarah harder than a physical blow. "She's always played the victim, Chloe. It's her only move. Just ignore her. By noon she'll be history, and we can make that 1 more p.m. reservation at Canlis." Sarah tightened her grip on her purse strap. She felt the baby kick, a sharp, strong thud against her ribs. "Hold it together, Sarah," she told herself. "Do not let them see you cry. Not today." For the last 6 months, Sarah's life had been a living hell. It hadn't been a slow drift apart. It had been a violent amputation. One day, she was the happy wife of a successful architect, preparing the nursery for their first son. The next, she had found bank transfers. Huge ones. Transfers to an account labeled CV Consulting. When she confronted Mark, she expected a denial. Instead, she got an eviction notice. He had filed for divorce first, froze their joint accounts, and, in a move of pure malice, claimed that Sarah was mentally unstable and unfit to parent, petitioning for full custody of the unborn child. He had cut off her credit cards, leaving her to navigate the 3rd trimester of a high-risk pregnancy with 0 financial support, relying on her retired mother's pension just to buy prenatal vitamins. "Mr. and Mrs. Miller," the bailiff called out from the heavy oak doors of courtroom 304. "Judge Sterling is ready for you." Chloe adjusted her diamond earrings, earrings that Sarah recognized. They were the ones Mark had claimed were lost during their anniversary trip to Aspen last year. "Showtime," Chloe sneered, brushing past Sarah. As she passed, she deliberately checked her shoulder into Sarah, sending the pregnant woman stumbling slightly. Sarah caught herself on the doorframe. Mark saw it. He didn't move a muscle to help. "Watch where you're going," Mark muttered, stepping over the threshold. "Clumsy." Sarah took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of old wood and floor wax. She walked into the courtroom, her swollen feet throbbing. She looked small in the massive room. She looked defeated, but as she took her seat at the defendant's table, next to her court-appointed lawyer, a tired-looking man named Mr. Henderson, Sarah reached into her bag and touched a small, cold USB drive. They thought she was weak. They thought she was just a breeding cow, as Chloe had once called her in a text message Sarah wasn't supposed to see. They thought money could buy the truth. But Sarah had spent the last 6 months doing more than just crying. She had been digging. And she prayed that Judge Evelyn Sterling, known in the circuit as the Iron Lady of Seattle, was as sharp as the rumors said. The courtroom was freezing, or maybe it was just the atmosphere. Judge Evelyn Sterling sat on the bench like a statue carved from granite. She was a woman in her 60s, with steel-grey hair cut into a sharp bob and reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. She didn't look up as the parties settled in. She was reading the case file, her brow furrowed. "Docket number 4492, Miller vs. Miller," the clerk announced. "Appearances," Judge Sterling said, her voice dry and authoritative. "Robert Blackwood for the petitioner, Mark Miller," Mark's lawyer announced, standing up. Blackwood was a legend in Seattle for all the wrong reasons. He was a shark in a 3-piece suit, known for destroying spouses so thoroughly they couldn't even afford the bus fare home. "James Henderson for the respondent, Sarah Miller," Sarah's lawyer said. Henderson didn't have the swagger of Blackwood. He was a public defender doing pro bono work because Sarah couldn't afford a retainer. He looked overworked, his suit was slightly ill-fitting, and he was shuffling papers nervously. Chloe Vane sat in the front row of the gallery, directly behind Mark. She crossed her legs, the slit in her dress revealing a scandalous amount of thigh for a family court setting. She pulled out her phone, snapping a selfie with the back of Mark's head, smirking. "Proceed, Mr. Blackwood," Judge Sterling said, finally looking up. Her eyes swept over the room, pausing for a fraction of a second on Chloe's red dress before settling on Mark. Blackwood buttoned his jacket and walked to the center of the room. He didn't use a podium. He liked to pace, to dominate the space. "Your Honor," Blackwood began, his voice smooth as silk. "This is a tragic case. A case of a man, my client, Mr. Mark Miller, who has worked tirelessly to build an empire, a legacy, only to be trapped in a marriage with a woman who sees him not as a partner, but as a paycheck." Sarah flinched. A paycheck? She had supported Mark for 5 years while he built his firm, working double shifts as a nurse until he finally landed his big break. "We intend to prove," Blackwood continued, pointing an accusatory finger at Sarah, "that Mrs. Miller is not only financially irresponsible, but morally bankrupt. We have evidence suggesting that her current pregnancy, the very child she uses to garner sympathy, may not even be my client's." A collective gasp rippled through the few people in the courtroom. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. This was a lie so bold, so disgusting, she hadn't seen it coming. From the gallery, a sharp, high-pitched laugh rang out. "Ha!" It was Chloe. She quickly covered her mouth, but her eyes were dancing with malicious glee. Judge Sterling's head snapped up. Her gaze locked onto Chloe in the gallery. "Is there something amusing about the legitimacy of a child, Ma'am?" Chloe blinked, feigning innocence. "No, Your Honor, just the audacity of some people." She glared at Sarah. "Silence in the gallery," Judge Sterling warned, her voice dropping an octave. "Or you will be removed." Blackwood cleared his throat, annoyed at the interruption, but eager to continue the slaughter. "As I was saying, Your Honor, Mr. Miller has been the victim of calculated emotional abuse. Mrs. Miller has threatened to destroy his reputation if he didn't pay her exorbitant sums. She is unstable. We have affidavits from witnesses stating she has been seen drinking alcohol heavily throughout her pregnancy." "That is a lie," Sarah shouted, standing up. "I haven't touched a drop." "Sit down, Mrs. Miller," Judge Sterling ordered, though her tone wasn't unkind. "You will have your turn." Sarah sank back into her chair, trembling. Henderson put a hand on her arm. "Easy, Sarah. Let them talk. The more they lie, the harder they fall." "Furthermore," Blackwood said, smiling smugly, "Mr. Miller is prepared to offer a settlement, solely for the sake of the child, despite the paternity questions. He is willing to pay $500 a month in support, provided Mrs. Miller vacates the marital home within 48 hours and grants Mr. Miller full legal custody." $500? In Seattle. It wouldn't even cover a closet, let alone an apartment for a mother and a newborn. It was a death sentence. "And," Blackwood added, turning to look at Chloe with a nod, "Mr. Miller has found a stable, loving partner in Ms. Chloe Vane, a successful interior designer, who is ready to step in and provide the motherly stability that Mrs. Miller clearly cannot." Chloe sat up straighter, preening. She gave a little wave to the judge. Sarah felt bile rise in her throat. The woman sleeping with her husband was being presented as the stable mother figure for Sarah's baby. Judge Sterling took off her glasses and cleaned them slowly. "Mr. Blackwood, you are painting a very vivid picture. You claim Mrs. Miller is unstable and an alcoholic. Do you have proof beyond these affidavits?" "We do, Your Honor. We have photos of her at bars." Blackwood slapped a folder onto the judge's bench. Judge Sterling opened the folder. She looked at the photos. Then she looked at Sarah. "Mrs. Miller, these photos are dated 3 weeks ago. You look significantly less pregnant in these photos than you do today." Sarah looked confused. Henderson stood up. "Objection, Your Honor." "May I see those?" Blackwood smirked. "It's clearly her." Henderson took the folder and looked. He frowned. "Your Honor, this is a woman with blonde hair from the back, but Sarah has a birthmark on her neck. This woman does not. Lighting issues," Blackwood dismissed. "Or," Judge Sterling said, her eyes narrowing, "fabrication." "My client is a man of integrity," Blackwood boomed. "Then he shouldn't mind if we scrutinize his finances with the same rigor you've applied to his wife's character," Judge Sterling said calmly. "Call your first witness." "I call Ms. Chloe Vane to the stand," Blackwood announced. This was it. The mistress was going to testify against the wife. Chloe stood up, smoothing down her red dress. The clicking of her heels sounded like gunshots as she walked to the witness stand. She passed Sarah and whispered, just loud enough for the microphone to catch a garbled noise. "Bye-bye, fatty." Sarah clenched her fists. She looked at the USB drive in her hand. "Just wait," she thought. "Just wait until you answer the question." As Chloe took the oath, swearing to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. She smiled at Mark. They thought the game was over. They thought they had won. But Judge Sterling was staring at the emerald necklace hanging around Chloe's neck. A necklace that looked suspiciously like an asset listed as stolen in the bankruptcy filing Mark had submitted for his company 6 months prior to avoid paying spousal support. The trap was set. "Miss Vane," Blackwood began, leaning against the railing of the witness box with a practiced casualness. "Thank you for being here today. I know this is difficult for you, given the harassment you've endured." Chloe nodded, dabbing at a completely dry eye with a tissue she had produced from nowhere. "It has been very hard, yes. I just want to support Mark. He's been through so much." "Could you describe the nature of your relationship with Mr. Miller?" "We are partners," Chloe said, her voice soft and sweet, a stark contrast to the venom she had spewed in the hallway. "We met professionally. I run a boutique design consultancy. Mark hired me to help with the branding of his firm. We fell in love after he confided in me about how lonely he was at home." She cast a pitying glance at the gallery, then a sharp, fearful look at Sarah. "He told me his wife was cold, distant, and when she got pregnant, she became aggressive." Sarah gasped. "I was on bed rest," she whispered frantically to Henderson. "I couldn't even walk to the bathroom without help, let alone be aggressive." Henderson squeezed her arm. "Record it," he whispered. "Write it down. Every lie." "Ms. Vane," Blackwood continued, "Mrs. Miller claims that you and Mr. Miller are hiding assets. She claims that the money meant for her and the child is being funneled to you. Is there any truth to this?" Chloe let out a melodramatic sigh. "Absolutely not. My business, CV Consulting, is entirely legitimate. I work very hard for my money. The lifestyle I lead? It's self-funded. Mark is actually in a very difficult financial position because of the failing market and his wife's spending habits. I've actually had to lend him money to pay his legal fees." Mark hung his head in the defendant's chair, playing the part of the broken man perfectly. "So," Blackwood said, turning to face the judge, "this woman in the red dress, who Mrs. Miller claims is a gold digger, is actually the financial savior of your client?" "Yes," Chloe said firmly. "I bought this dress myself. I bought my car myself. Sarah is just jealous because she let herself go, and she can't accept that Mark moved on to someone who takes care of herself." The insult hung in the air like a foul smell. "No further questions," Blackwood said, smirking at Sarah. Henderson stood up slowly. He looked tired. He looked like a man who was bringing a plastic knife to a gunfight. "Ms. Vane," Henderson began, shuffling his papers. "You say you run CV Consulting?" "That's right," Chloe snapped, her sweet demeanor vanishing the moment the defense attorney spoke. "And what exactly does CV Consulting do?" "I told you, branding, interior design, high-end lifestyle management." "I see," Henderson said. He pulled a piece of paper from his stack. "I have here your tax returns from 2 years ago. You reported an income of $18,000 as a part-time barista. Yet, in the last 6 months, coinciding exactly with the time Mr. Miller began moving funds out of his joint accounts, your company, which has no website, no office address, and no other clients, received $1.2 million in payments from Miller and Associates." Chloe froze. Mark shifted in his seat. "Objection," Blackwood roared. "Relevance. Ms. Vane's business acumen is not on trial here." "It goes to credibility, Your Honor," Henderson argued weakly. "Sustained," Judge Sterling said, but her eyes were cold. "Mr. Henderson, stick to the domestic matter unless you have proof of fraud." "Do you have proof of fraud?" Henderson hesitated. He looked at Sarah. They had suspicions, but the bank records were encrypted, and Mark had hidden the keys. "Not definitive proof, Your Honor. Just suspicious timing." "Then move on," Judge Sterling commanded. Chloe smirked. She had dodged the bullet. "Ms. Vane?" Henderson tried again. You claimed you bought that dress yourself, and your car. What about the jewelry? All me, Chloe said defiantly. I'm an independent woman. The necklace you're wearing, Henderson pointed out. It's quite stunning. Emerald and diamond. Vintage Art Deco, if I'm not mistaken. Chloe's hand went to her throat. She looked at Mark. Mark gave a barely perceptible nod. Yes, Chloe said. I bought it at an estate sale in Portland 3 months ago. 3 months ago, Henderson repeated. Interesting, because Mr. Miller listed an identical necklace as a family heirloom lost during a robbery on his insurance claim 4 months ago. He collected $45,000 for it. The courtroom went silent. Blackwood shot up. Objection. Coincidence. There are thousands of Art Deco necklaces. With the exact same setting, Henderson pressed. We have the insurance photo. Objection sustained, Judge Sterling said, surprisingly. Unless you can physically examine the necklace right now, Mr. Henderson, you are speculating. Sarah's heart sank. The judge was shutting them down. Every time they got close, the gavel came down. Was Sterling bought off? Was she just too rigid? No further questions, Henderson said, defeated. Chloe stood up, smoothing her dress, looking triumphant. She turned to leave the stand. Wait, a voice cut through the silence. It wasn't Blackwood. It wasn't Henderson. It was Judge Sterling. Sit back down, Miss Vane, the judge said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that made the windows rattle. Chloe froze. She looked at the judge, her smile faltering. Excuse me? I said sit down. I have a few questions for you myself. In most courtrooms, judges are passive referees. They let the lawyers fight it out. But in Judge Evelyn Sterling's courtroom, she was the judge, jury, and executioner. She didn't like liars. And she really didn't like people who wasted her time. Chloe sat back down, looking annoyed rather than scared. Make it quick, please. We have a lunch reservation. The audacity made the bailiff's jaw drop. Judge Sterling slowly took off her glasses. She leaned forward, resting her chin on her clasped hands. She stared at Chloe for a long, uncomfortable minute. You have a lunch reservation? The judge repeated. At Canlis, I believe I heard Mr. Miller say earlier. Yes, Chloe said. It's very hard to get a table. I'm sure, Judge Sterling said. Tell me, Ms. Vane, you stated under oath that you are the sole proprietor of CV Consulting. Yes. And you stated that you provided branding services for Miller and Associates. Yes. I redesigned their logo. I picked out their office furniture. For $1.2 million, the judge's eyebrow raised. My services are premium, Chloe scoffed. Quality costs money. Indeed, Judge Sterling said. She picked up a document from her bench. It wasn't a document either of the lawyers had submitted. It was the bankruptcy file Mark had submitted to this very court in a different division. Mr. Blackwood, the judge said, not taking her eyes off Chloe. Your client, Mr. Miller, filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection for his firm 6 months ago. In that filing, he claimed the company had 0 liquid assets and significant debt. He claimed he couldn't pay his employees. He definitely claimed he couldn't pay spousal support. Blackwood stood up, sweating. Your Honor, the market is volatile. Quiet, Sterling snapped. She turned back to Chloe. So if the company was bankrupt, Ms. Vane, where did the $1.2 million come from to pay you? Chloe blinked. She looked at Mark. Mark was now pale, shaking his head slightly. Don't answer, his eyes screamed. I don't know the details of his books, Chloe stammered. I just sent the invoices and they got paid. You just got paid, the judge repeated. Now, let's talk about that necklace again. I told you I bought it, Chloe said, her voice rising in pitch. It's mine. You said you bought it in Portland, at an estate sale, 3 months ago. Yes. Do you have the receipt? Who keeps receipts for everything? Chloe snapped. People who buy $45,000 necklaces usually do, Judge Sterling said dryly. But here is what I find curious, Miss Vane, and this is the question that I need you to answer very carefully. Because perjury is a felony, and in my state, it carries a prison sentence of up to 5 years. The room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. You claim you bought that necklace 3 months ago, the judge said. But in the discovery documents provided by Mrs. Miller's counsel, which I read very thoroughly last night, there is a photograph of you. The judge held up a piece of paper. It was a grainy printout from Instagram. This is a photo from your Instagram account, Miss Vane, dated 2 years ago, long before you claim to have met Mr. Miller, long before you bought this necklace 3 months ago. The judge pointed a long, manicured finger at the photo. In this photo, you are wearing that necklace, the exact one. But wait, didn't you say you bought it 3 months ago? And didn't Mr. Miller claim it was a family heirloom lost in a robbery 4 months ago? Chloe's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Mark slammed his hand on the table. This is a setup. Sit down, Mr. Miller, the bailiff shouted, moving toward him. The question is, Judge Sterling continued, her voice turning into pure ice. Did you lie about buying it 3 months ago? Or did Mr. Miller lie about it being stolen to commit insurance fraud? Or did you two conspire to hide assets from this court and from Mrs. Miller by laundering money through a fake consulting firm and faking robberies? Chloe looked at Mark. The confidence was gone. The arrogance was shattered. She was a 24-year-old amateur playing a game against a grandmaster. Mark gave it to me, she screamed, cracking under the pressure. He gave it to me 2 years ago. He told me to say I bought it. He told me to say everything. Chloe, shut up, Mark roared. He made me do it. Chloe was crying now, ugly mascara tears running down her face. He said if I didn't help him hide the money, Sarah would take it all. He said he'd leave me if I didn't help him transfer the funds to the Cayman accounts. The entire courtroom gasped. She had just admitted to 1. Perjury, 2. Insurance fraud, 3. Money laundering, 4. Offshore tax evasion. Sarah sat there, stunned. She hadn't even needed the USB drive. They had destroyed themselves. Cayman accounts? Judge Sterling asked, her voice dangerously calm. I don't recall seeing any Cayman accounts in the financial disclosures. They're not listed, Chloe wailed. That's the point. He has $3 million in there. He's not broke. He's rich. And he promised me a villa if I helped him destroy her. She pointed a trembling finger at Sarah. Judge Sterling looked at Mark Miller. Mark was slumped in his chair, his face buried in his hands. Blackwood was packing his briefcase, looking like he wanted to vanish into thin air. Well, Judge Sterling said, leaning back, that certainly clears up the he said, she said portion of the proceedings. She turned to Sarah. Mrs. Miller, you have been very patient. Sarah stood up, her legs shaking. Your Honor, I knew they were lying, but I didn't know it was this bad. It's about to get worse for them, Judge Sterling promised. But I believe you had some evidence you wanted to present. Your lawyer mentioned a USB drive earlier, but didn't enter it. Does it have anything to do with these Cayman accounts? Sarah looked at Henderson. Henderson nodded. Yes, Your Honor, Sarah said, her voice finding its strength. I found it in his home office before he kicked me out. I didn't know the password to the files, but I think the audio recordings on it might be relevant now. Audio recordings? The judge's eyes lit up. Please bring it forward. The bailiff took the USB drive from Sarah and plugged it into the court's AV system. "What is this?" Mark whispered aggressively to Blackwood. "I never recorded anything." "Dashcam," Blackwood muttered, realizing too late. "Your new Tesla. It records inside the cabin when in sentry mode. You idiot." The screen above the jury box flickered to life. It was a video from inside Mark's luxury SUV. The date stamp was from 4 months ago, the day Mark had kicked Sarah out. In the video, Mark was sitting in the driver's seat. Chloe was in the passenger seat. Video playback. Mark. God, she was crying so loud. "Where will I go? What about the baby?" It was pathetic. Chloe laughs, applying lipstick in the sun visor mirror. "Did she actually believe you were broke?" Mark. Hook, line, and sinker. "I told her the firm was under." Meanwhile, the transfer to the Georgetown account clears tomorrow. Once the divorce is finalized and I get custody, solely to avoid child support, obviously, we can dump the kid with my mum and fly to Saint-Tropez. Chloe. "Ugh, I don't want to deal with a baby, Mark, even on weekends." Mark. "Don't worry, babe. Once I have full custody, I'm declared the primary parent. Then I can just neglect the visitation. Sarah will be so broken and poor, she won't be able to fight it. She'll probably end up in a shelter. Who cares? We win." Chloe. "You're wicked." "I love it. Does Blackwood know?" Mark. "Blackwood knows enough to get paid. He doesn't need to know about the second set of books." The video cut to black. The silence in the courtroom was different this time. It wasn't the silence of tension. It was the silence of absolute, collective disgust. Judge Sterling looked at the screen for a long moment. Then she looked at Mark Miller. "Mr. Blackwood," the judge said softly. "I assume you were not aware of the second set of books mentioned in that video." Blackwood stood up, his face red. "I was absolutely not, Your Honor. And at this time, I must move to withdraw as counsel for Mr. Miller. I cannot represent a client who uses my services to further a criminal enterprise." "Motion granted," Sterling said instantly. "You may leave." Blackwood didn't hesitate. He grabbed his briefcase and walked out, leaving Mark Miller alone at the defense table. Mark looked around wildly. That was taken out of context. It was a joke, a dark joke." "A joke," Judge Sterling deadpanned. "Ms. Vane just confessed to the crimes you joked about." The judge turned to the bailiff. "Officer, please lock the doors. No one leaves this room." She looked down at Sarah. Sarah was crying, but they weren't tears of sadness anymore. They were tears of relief. The monster had just taken off his mask, and the whole world had seen the ugly truth underneath. "Mrs. Miller," Judge Sterling said gently, "I am going to make a ruling on the divorce and custody right now. But before I do, I have a duty to report crimes committed in my courtroom." She pressed a button on her bench. "This is Judge Sterling in courtroom 304. I need the sheriff's deputies up here immediately. And get me the district attorney on the line. We have a confession to grand larceny, fraud, and perjury." Chloe let out a scream. "I didn't mean it. Mark made me. Mark, do something." Mark sat frozen, staring at the empty space where his lawyer used to be. But the drama wasn't over. Because as the deputies banged on the courtroom doors to enter, Sarah clutched her stomach. The stress, the adrenaline, the sudden drop in tension. "Oh God," Sarah groaned, doubling over. Henderson caught her. "Sarah, what is it?" "Water," Sarah gasped. "My water. It just broke." Chaos erupted. "Call an ambulance," Judge Sterling shouted, standing up and shedding her robe, moving from judge to human in a split second. "She's going into labor," Henderson yelled. And in the middle of it all, Mark Miller stood up, looking at his wife in pain. "Sarah," he said, taking a step toward her. "Sarah, look, we can fix this." "Get away from her!" Chloe shrieked, grabbing Mark's arm. "You need to fix this with me. You promised me a villa." "Officer!" Judge Sterling pointed at Mark and Chloe. "Arrest them both. Right now. Get them away from her." As the deputies swarmed Mark and Chloe, handcuffing the woman in the red dress and the man in the bespoke suit, Sarah was lowered to the floor by her lawyer and the court clerk. "Just breathe, Sarah," the judge said, kneeling beside her, holding her hand. "You've won. It's over. Just breathe." The atmosphere in courtroom 304 shattered. It didn't crack. It didn't splinter. It completely and utterly exploded. One moment, the room had been a theatre of legal warfare, filled with the dry rustle of papers and the sharp stinging of accusations. The next, it was a scene of primal urgency. Sarah Miller's scream cut through the recycled air, a sound so raw and filled with agony that it made the bailiff, a man who had seen bar fights and riots, flinch visibly. Sarah was on the floor. Her knees had given way the moment the stress of the trial collided with the biology of her pregnancy. The grey maternity dress, which Chloe had mocked only an hour earlier, was now bunched around her waist as she clawed at the thin courtroom carpet. "It's too early," Sarah gasped, her face draining of all colour until she looked like a ghost. She gripped the leg of the defendant's table so hard her knuckles turned white. "He's not due for 6 weeks. Something is wrong." Mr. Henderson, her court-appointed lawyer, dropped his briefcase. Papers spilled everywhere, affidavits, tax returns, photos of the mistress. But he didn't care. He fell to his knees beside her, his hands hovering uselessly. "Sarah? Sarah, breathe. Someone call 911, now." But Judge Evelyn Sterling was already moving. The Iron Lady of Seattle did something no one in that courthouse had ever seen her do. She vaulted off the bench. She didn't use the stairs. She hiked up her black robes and jumped down to the floor level, tearing off the heavy judicial garment as she moved. Underneath, she was just a woman in a silk blouse, but her authority hadn't diminished. It had transformed. "Bailiff!" Sterling barked, her voice commanding the chaos. "Lock the doors. No one leaves. Get me the first aid kit from the clerk's station." "You." She pointed to the court reporter, a young woman who looked ready to faint. "Get on the phone with dispatch. Tell them we have a high-risk precipitous labor, 34 weeks. We need a neonatal unit, not just an ambulance." "My water," Sarah cried out, her body convulsing with a contraction that seemed to ripple through her entire frame. "It's everywhere. The pressure. God, the pressure." "I know, honey, I know," Judge Sterling said, dropping to her knees beside Sarah. She balled up her expensive judicial robe and shoved it under Sarah's head as a pillow. "You're going into shock. Henderson, give me your jacket. Cover her legs. We need to keep her warm." While the center of the room became a makeshift delivery ward, the perimeter was a scene of violent disintegration. Mark Miller and Chloe Vane were trying to process the sudden implosion of their lives. The two deputies who had entered to arrest them weren't interested in the medical drama. They were interested in securing two felons who had just confessed to federal crimes on the record. "Get your hands behind your back," the senior deputy shouted, grabbing Mark by the shoulder of his bespoke Italian suit. "Get off me," Mark roared, shoving the officer back. He wasn't looking at the deputy. He was looking at Sarah. His face was a mask of absolute horror. The reality of the situation was crashing down on him like a landslide. "Sarah! Sarah, wait! Sir, stop resisting or you will be tased," the deputy warned, reaching for his belt. "I'm not resisting," Mark screamed, his voice cracking. "My wife is dying. That's my wife." "She's the woman you just tried to frame for alcoholism," the deputy spat back, spinning Mark around and slamming him chest first against the heavy oak prosecution table. The sound of air leaving Mark's lungs was audible. Click. The cold steel of the handcuffs bit into his wrists. Click. Mark struggled, twisting his neck to see the floor where Sarah lay, writhing in pain. "Sarah, I didn't mean for this to happen. I just wanted the money. Sarah, tell them to let me go." Beside him, Chloe Vane was having a meltdown that was far less sympathetic. The woman in the red dress had realized that there was no exit. The villa in Saint-Tropez was gone. The shopping sprees were gone. The reputation she had carefully curated on Instagram was about to be destroyed. "You liar!" Chloe shrieked, turning her fury on Mark as a female officer grabbed her wrists. "You told me it was white collar. You said we wouldn't get caught. I'm too pretty for jail, Mark. Do something." "Shut up, Chloe," Mark bellowed, tears streaming down his face. Tears of frustration, not remorse. "Can't you see she's in labor? Shut your mouth for once in your life." "Don't you dare talk to me like that!" Chloe screamed, thrashing against the officer. Her heel caught on the carpet, and she stumbled, one of her Louboutins snapping off. She fell to one knee, the officer hauling her back up. "You made me wear the necklace. You made me sign the papers. I'm the victim here." "Get them out." Judge Sterling's voice cut through the noise like a whip. She didn't look up from Sarah's dilated gaze. "Get those parasites out of my courtroom so this woman can have her child in peace." "Wait!" Mark shouted as the deputies began to drag them toward the prisoner, holding cell door at the side of the room. "I have a right to be there. It's my son." Sarah let out a guttural, animalistic scream that silenced Mark instantly. "Ah! That's it, Sarah," Judge Sterling coached, her hands busy checking the progress. "The head is crowning. The baby is coming fast. Too fast. You have to listen to me. On the next contraction, I need you to push with everything you have left. Do you hear me?" "I can't," Sarah sobbed, sweat matting her blonde hair to her forehead. She grabbed Henderson's hand so hard the lawyer winced in pain. "I'm tired. I'm so tired. I haven't eaten." Mark cut off the grocery money. "I'm too weak." "You are not weak," Sterling said fiercely, leaning in close. "You survived 6 months of psychological torture. You survived a man who tried to erase you. You stood up in this court, and you fought for the truth. You are the strongest woman in this building. Now push for your son." Something shifted in Sarah's eyes. The fear didn't leave, but a steel resolve replaced the panic. She took a shuddering breath. "Okay," Sarah whispered. "Okay." "Here it comes!" Sterling yelled. "Push!" Sarah bore down. Her face turned crimson. The veins in her neck bulged. The room held its breath. Even the court reporter stopped typing. Even the deputies paused, holding Mark and Chloe by the arms near the exit. Mark stopped struggling. He watched, frozen. He watched the woman he had called fat and useless do the most difficult thing a human being can do. He saw the raw power in her, a power he had never appreciated. And then the silence broke. It wasn't a cry at first. It was a wet, gurgling cough. Then a sharp intake of air. And then a high, thin wail that filled the vaulted ceiling of the courtroom. "Wah! Wah!" Sarah collapsed back onto the judge's robe, gasping, her chest heaving. Judge Sterling, her hands covered in fluids, lifted the tiny, wriggling infant into the air. He was small, barely 5 pounds, and covered in vernix and blood. But his limbs were moving. His chest was pink. He was fighting. "It's a boy," Sterling announced, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. "Sarah, look. It's a beautiful baby boy." The bailiff rushed over with his oversized uniform jacket. Sterling wrapped the infant carefully, creating a makeshift swaddle, and laid him on Sarah's chest. The moment the baby touched her skin, Sarah's sobbing changed. The agonizing cries of labor turned into the soft, rhythmic weeping of relief. She brought her trembling hands up to cup the baby's head. "Hi," she whispered. her voice hoarse. "Hi, little one. I'm here. Mama's here." The baby settled against the beat of her heart, his cries quieting to a whimper. At the door, Mark Miller let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. He's okay. Is he okay?" He took a step towards them, dragging the deputy with him. The entitlement was still there, ingrained in his DNA. "Let me see him. I want to hold him. That's my heir." Judge Sterling slowly stood up. She wiped her hands on a towel the clerk had handed her. She adjusted her blouse, took a deep breath, and turned to face Mark. She didn't look like a midwife anymore. She looked like the wrath of God. "Officer," Sterling said, her voice deadly calm, "bring the prisoner here, just for a moment." The deputy hesitated, then marched Mark forward until he was 10 feet away. Mark smiled, a weak, hopeful smile. He thought he had won a concession. He thought the baby was his ticket to leniency. "He looks like me," Mark said, his eyes fixated on the bundle in Sarah's arms. "Sarah, look at him. He has my nose. We can fix this. For him. I can hire the best nannies. I can—" "Mr. Miller," Judge Sterling interrupted. Mark looked at her. "Take a good look," Sterling said, pointing at the child. "Memorize that face, because it is the last time you will ever see it outside of a photograph." Mark's smile vanished. "What? You can't do that. I'm his father." "You are a sperm donor," Sterling corrected, her voice dripping with disdain. "A father protects, a father provides. You tried to steal the roof over this child's head. You tried to brand his mother a drunkard so you could stash him away and ignore him. You plotted to abandon him to save money on child support." "I was stressed," Mark pleaded. "I didn't mean it." "Intent is proven by action," Sterling said. She stepped between Mark and Sarah, acting as a physical shield. "Sarah Miller has just proven her devotion with her body and her blood. You have proven yours with wire transfers to the Caymans and a mistress in the gallery." Sterling turned to the deputies. "Get him out of my sight, and get her out too." The deputies yanked Mark back. The reality finally hit him. There would be no negotiation. There would be no deal. "Sarah!" Mark screamed as he was dragged backward. "Sarah, don't let them take me. I'm sorry. Sarah didn't look up. She was busy counting her son's fingers. She was busy checking his breathing. She was busy being a mother. Mark Miller had ceased to exist in her world the moment that baby cried. Chloe was dragged out first, sobbing about her ruined dress. Mark followed, his heels dragging on the carpet, his eyes locked on the son he had thrown away, until the heavy double doors swung shut with a final, resonant boom. The silence that followed was heavy, but it was peaceful. Minutes later, the sirens finally grew loud outside. The paramedics burst through the doors with a gurney and a crash kit, looking ready for a war zone. They stopped short when they saw the scene. The mother was on the floor, covered in a judge's robe and a bailiff's jacket. The baby was sleeping on her chest. The lawyer was holding her hand, and the judge was sitting on the floor, cleaning her glasses, looking exhausted but satisfied. "We got a call about a precipitous labor," the lead paramedic asked, confused. Judge Sterling put her glasses back on. She looked at the paramedics and offered a tired smile. "You're late, gentlemen," she said. "The court has already delivered its ruling." "And the baby." As the paramedics carefully lifted Sarah onto the gurney, ensuring the umbilical cord was clamped and the baby was stable, Sarah reached out and grabbed Judge Sterling's hand one last time. "Thank you," Sarah whispered. "Don't thank me," Sterling said softly, squeezing her hand. "You did all the work. Now go. Get that boy healthy. And don't worry about the legal fees. I know a few lawyers who would love to take on a pro bono case against the man who just confessed in open court." As they wheeled Sarah out, the courtroom felt empty. But it wasn't the emptiness of loss. It was the emptiness of a room that had been cleansed. The bad air was gone. The lies were gone. All that was left was the truth, and the faint, lingering smell of antiseptic and new life. The King County Courthouse looked different in the summer. The grey clouds of Seattle had parted, leaving a brilliant blue sky. But inside courtroom 304, the air was just as heavy as it had been that winter day. This time, however, the roles were reversed. Sarah Miller sat in the gallery. She looked vibrant. The dark circles were gone. She was wearing a tailored navy suit, her hair styled in soft waves. In her lap, sleeping soundly in a baby carrier, was 6-month-old Leo. He was chubby, happy, and blissfully unaware that his father was sitting 20 feet away in an orange jumpsuit. This was not family court. This was criminal court, the state of Washington versus Mark Anthony Miller and Chloe Vane. Mark looked terrible. Prison food and 6 months of being denied bail had stripped away his veneer of handsome success. He was gaunt, unshaven, and his eyes darted nervously around the room. Chloe Vane sat at a separate table. She had taken a plea deal. In exchange for a reduced sentence, she had agreed to testify against Mark. She wore a plain grey cardigan and no makeup. She refused to look at Mark. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named District Attorney Reynolds, was wrapping up her closing statement. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Reynolds said, pacing before the jury box, "greed is a common motive, but the level of calculation required to bankrupt a thriving company, defraud an insurance agency, launder money through a shell corporation, and psychologically torture a pregnant spouse goes beyond simple greed. It is malice." Reynolds pointed at the screen. The infamous dash cam video was frozen on Mark's face. You heard the tape. You saw the bank records recovered from the encrypted hard drive, $3 million hidden in the Cayman Islands, while his wife was forced to apply for food stamps. You heard Miss Vane testify that Mr. Miller instructed her on exactly how to lie under oath. Reynolds turned to Mark. Mark Miller didn't just want to leave his marriage. He wanted to annihilate it. He wanted to win at all costs. But he forgot one thing. The truth leaves a paper trail. Reynolds sat down. Mark's new public defender stood up. He had no energy. He knew the case was hopeless. He gave a brief, mumbled speech about intent and stress. But the jury looked bored. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. When the foreman stood up to read the verdict, Sarah covered Leo's ears gently, instinctively protecting him from the bad news, even though he couldn't understand. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Mark Anthony Miller, guilty on all counts," the foreman read. "Guilty. Grand larceny. Guilty. Insurance fraud. Guilty. Perjury. Guilty. Tax evasion." Judge Sterling wasn't presiding over this case. It was a conflict of interest since she was a witness. But she was sitting in the back row, watching. The sentencing judge, an imposing man named Judge Patterson, looked at Mark over his spectacles. "Mr. Miller, in my 20 years on the bench, I have rarely seen a case of domestic financial abuse so calculated and cruel. You didn't just steal money. You tried to steal a woman's sanity and a child's security." Mark stood up, trembling. "Your Honor, please. I have a son. I want to see my son grow up." Judge Patterson looked at Sarah in the gallery. He looked at the baby. Then he looked back at Mark. "You should have thought of that when you plotted to abandon him in a shelter," Patterson said. "Mark Miller, I sentence you to 15 years in the Washington State Penitentiary. You will also be required to pay restitution in the amount of $3.2 million to Sarah Miller, representing the assets you attempted to hide, plus damages." 15 years. Mark's knees buckled. He would be nearly 50 when he got out. Leo would be in high school. And regarding Ms. Vane, the judge continued. Chloe stood up, hopeful. She had cooperated. She expected probation. While your cooperation was helpful, Ms. Vane, you were a willing participant in the destruction of a family until you were caught. You perjured yourself in a court of law. I sentence you to 3 years in state prison, Chloe shrieked. 3 years? But I helped you. You helped yourself, the judge corrected. Bailiffs, take them away. As Mark was led out, clinking in his chains, he locked eyes with Sarah one last time. He looked for pity. He looked for the woman who used to love him. Sarah looked back. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply adjusted Leo's blanket, stood up, and turned her back on him. She walked out of the courtroom, into the sunlight. The epilogue. 3 months later, the Miller Foundation opened its doors in downtown Seattle. Using the restitution money and the liquidated assets from Mark's firm, Sarah had started a non-profit organization dedicated to providing legal and financial aid to women trapped in abusive marriages. She was in her new office, a bright, airy space filled with toys for her clients' children, when there was a knock on the door. "Come in," Sarah called out, bouncing Leo on her knee. The door opened, and Judge Evelyn Sterling walked in. She wasn't wearing her robe. She was wearing a trench coat and holding a gift bag. "Judge Sterling," Sarah stood up, surprised. I didn't expect to see you. Please call me Evelyn." The judge smiled. She walked over and looked at Leo. He was gripping a plastic rattle, drooling happily. "He's gotten big." "He has," Sarah said. "He's trying to walk already." "He's a fighter," Evelyn said. "Like his mother." She handed Sarah the gift bag. Inside was a small velvet box. Sarah opened it. It was a necklace. A simple, elegant silver chain with a small pendant of a scale, the scales of justice. "I wanted you to have this," Evelyn said. "To remind you, justice isn't just about punishing the bad guys. It's about balancing the scales so the good people can live their lives." Sarah touched the pendant, tears pricking her eyes. "Thank you. For everything. That question you asked Chloe, about the Instagram photo." "How did you know?" Evelyn chuckled, a twinkle in her eye. "I didn't know for sure. I had a hunch. But in my experience, people who are arrogant enough to steal a life are usually arrogant enough to document it on social media. I just had to bluff hard enough to make her crack." Sarah laughed. It was a true, happy laugh. "Well, it worked," Sarah said. "You saved us." "No," Evelyn said, turning to the door. "You saved yourself, Sarah. You brought that USB drive. You walked into that courtroom when you wanted to hide. I just held the door open." Evelyn waved and walked out, back to the courthouse to terrify another generation of liars. Sarah walked to the window. She looked out at the Seattle skyline. She owned her home again. She had a thriving purpose. She had her son. She thought about Mark, sitting in a cell, wearing orange instead of Armani. She thought about Chloe, wearing prison denim instead of Chanel. "Karma," Sarah whispered to Leo, kissing his forehead. "It's a funny thing, baby. It might be late, but it never misses an appointment." And there you have it, the story of how a red dress, a stolen necklace, and a mother's intuition brought down an empire of lies. It's a powerful reminder that arrogance is often the architect of its own destruction. Mark and Chloe thought they were untouchable because they had money and a plan, but they underestimated the power of the truth and the eyes of a sharp judge. What did you think of Judge Sterling's trap? Would you have been able to keep your cool like Sarah did? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a new story from us. We have plenty more tales of karma, revenge, and real-life drama coming your way. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.